we've worked just toward the well-being of me and mine. And in all those areas, drawing from all that research and all those statistics, a trend emerged. It's the bell curve. Contrary to stories that we often tell ourselves about American history, from the late 1890s through until the 1960s, there has been a clear directionality in the way our nation has functioned and operated in our nationally shared mindset. With every passing year from the beginning of that curve, except for that little blip that drops down that was related to war, we have focused more every year than the previous year on social solidarity. We focused more on the common good. We focused more on looking out for one another, and we focused more on the commitment that we all carry to one another. Now, it's a good book. I think if you read it, it'll give you hope. But something happened around the 1950s. You can see the curve changes. And the thing that happened is our commitment to more and more and more and more community took a slight shift. And it became a commitment to conformity. In other words, we're not just for one another. We now kind of insist that we be like one another. If you think about the McCarthy era, it was kind of the embodiment of that. Are you one of us or are you one of them? Because we are all alike and we all think the same way. So we made this shift around the 1950s from community to conformity. Consequently, community, what was becoming conformity, started to feel stifling to some people, began to feel constraining, began to suffocate anyone who didn't fit into the mold of conformity that we celebrated when we were practicing community, and that was usually white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. So in the 50s, popular culture began to rumble with discontent. If you're old, you might remember the beatniks. The beatniks were beginning to push back against the accepted cultural norms, or the rebel without a cause, or the man in the gray flannel suit, or Down with the Man in the early 60s. People who didn't fit into the conformative norms were feeling their non-belonging, and they began to insist on a place in society. Women who didn't fit into the stay-at-home expectation of women at the time, black and brown people who didn't fit into the white people norm, gay and lesbian people, Jewish people, disabled people, special ed people, all began to push for a place in society, began to push for belonging. The folks who were not part of the acceptable American norm felt the pain of not being accepted and began to push back. And that began to take off around the 60s. So around 1963, the author's research shows, those trends that had been increasingly moving up from the 1890s tipped. And we began a long run, 60 years now, where every year, more than the year previous, we began to focus more on the individual and a little bit less on the communal. It's what human beings do. We go down one path, we realize there's pain associated with that path, and so we make a correction. We adjust, we react, we go another way. That's human, that's healthy, that's good. But it's just as human, not just to correct, but to overcorrect. Not just to adjust, but to overadjust. And not just to react, but to overreact. 1960s were the height of American joining. Americans who belonged to something were up in the 80 percentile. People who belonged to a church and went to meetings, that's how they measured belonging. Did you go to meetings? Did you carry a role? Did you carry a responsibility? They belonged to church and they went to meetings. They belonged to a union and they went to meetings. They belonged to a civic organization and they went to meetings. They belonged to a bowling league and they went to meetings. The 1960s were the height of American joining. We showed up to meetings. People expected us to show up and we showed up. We took turns as officers helping organize the meetings. We took turns being officers in the PTA, all of us organizing stuff for the rest of us, who would then, in their turn, organize stuff for us. We were joiners. We joined the churches and the bowling leagues and the supper clubs and the Kiwanis and the Elks and the Shriners. We were joiners. And when our nation shifted to that collective focus and moved toward the individual focus, we slowly stopped joining. We slowly stopped protecting the commons. We slowly stopped prioritizing the common good. And we began to focus on individual rights and individual freedom and individual liberty and lost sight of the collective. And in the shuffle, we lost joining. The number of people who join now, again measured by going to meetings, taking on a responsibility, down from the 80 percentile to the tens. Joining now means sending a check. We join a group and we send a check to the group. We don't show up for it. Running for school board, which I'm doing right now, has been eye-opening for me. Because I know history, I know the words. I knew the word precinct, I knew the word precinct captain. What I didn't realize is that there's a whole network of people out there who are assigned to an area around a local voting place, whose job is to get out the vote, whose job is to hold meetings, whose job is to assign tasks, whose job is to commit to each other, to host candidate forums, to drop off literature at houses, to knock on doors, to have get-to-know-you picnics and things like that, to help the neighbors get to know each other. Well, because I've stepped into that world, I see it. And it feels like a throwback to another time. Now, because I've been to those meetings, however, I realize what we've lost, that we don't do that. I bet you don't know about your precinct either. I bet you don't know who your precinct captain is. I bet you don't go to meetings. I bet you've never been to one of the cookouts. I bet you've never gone to one of the candidate forums. I know because when I've been to them, there are like 22 people there. And I've seen what happens in these meetings, and what I've seen is human beings connecting to each other. What I've seen is human beings having companionship with one another. I've seen people who moved into town who don't know anybody showing up to volunteer, and as a result of that, being integrated into relationships with people. I've seen people working side by side with other people and talking about their lives as they do. And I've seen, sadly, what we lost to the sands of time when we lost joining. Our shifting priorities, our shifting emphasis, boy, it corrected a big problem. But we also lost something precious. We lost together. We lost something precious. You're also aware that I have been meeting with a lot of churches looking for a new home for us. And as I've done that, I've seen our American history in the architecture of our churches. Whenever you see a big steeple in town, I can tell you what you are probably seeing. Odds are you're seeing a building that was once the chapel that was built in the late 40s. Because the war was over and people who had fought for democracy now came home to participate in democracy. And for that, that meant that they came back to join stuff. They came back to be involved in stuff, and they did. And one of the main things they joined, one of the main things they got involved in was church. So the first thing they did was build a place to be together, and it was the chapel. We are sitting in one of them right now. If you look at the little placard right there, so it was built in 1949. Most of the chapels in this city were built right after the war. And then, you also know a little bit about our history, they started having babies. They began to have the baby boom. And sure enough, if you go all over town, you will see a whole bunch of places that have a chapel, and then usually right next to it or right behind it is a children's wing, because they started having babies. And sure enough, until we moved downstairs, up there, that was the children's wing, and it was built in the 50s, because sure enough, that's what happened, and that's how the process went. Then, when joining hit its peak sometime in the 60s, we began to build large sanctuaries. Look at that right over there. There's one with a great big steeple on it. Anytime you see a great big steeple, that means 40s, had a chapel, 50s had a children's wing, 60s had a great big sanctuary, some of those stretched into the 70s. When you drive around our city, that is the pattern you will see, 40s, 50s, 60s. Human beings joining, then declining in their joining, so that now most of those big sanctuaries sit very underutilized. One of the other reasons I thought it was so important that we meet at a church and not go spend money to build out space. So, our shift to individual rights solved one problem, an important problem, an individual suffocation problem. But anytime you swing on a pendulum, you don't go from out of balance to balance. You tend to go from out of balance to counterbalance. And you go too far down that path, we create another problem. We corrected, and then we overcorrected. We adjusted, and then we overadjusted. And now, our culture is experiencing an epidemic of loneliness, particularly among our old folks and our youngest folks. And our culture is experiencing an epidemic of young people alienated, not feeling their belonging, going in and shooting up their schools. And our culture is not able to make our marriages work because we are disconnected from an older generation that has more experience who can help the younger people make their marriages work. And we've lost the capacity to work with people who think differently than we think. We are gullible to marketers who are trying to sell us outrage because we are not in community with the others that they are telling us we should be outraged against. And so this whole process is happening because when you swing on a pendulum and go to counterbalance, you create another problem by solving one. Now, our problem now is that we are ignoring the health of the commons. We are willing to get to destroy the national fabric in order to make sure our tribe wins. We suffer the consequences of going too far down this, and one of the things that gets lost along the way is joining. Now, we don't know anymore the things that are required for joining. We've kind of lost those skill sets. Commitment is one of them. We said at the very beginning of our times together as a congregation, commitment is for us the C word. We don't use it. And the reason we didn't use it is because it had been so overused and so drummed into people and so pounding on the head of people that we just knew we couldn't use it. Commitment was a bad word. And you probably feel it inside. Commitment feels bad. It feels like a burden. It feels like something being imposed upon us. It feels like a hassle because we don't know how to do commitment anymore because our cultural shift then is one of the headwinds that we now experience. We grow up in it. And we don't know how to prioritize collective time over individual time. Partly it's because Netflix is offering us an algorithm that makes us click, 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 and stay there and do more stuff and look at social media more. There are options out there, but we've also lost the sense, the interior sense that we prioritize together time. We don't go to meetings. We don't talk to strangers. We don't put ourselves into social environments. We don't do that as much as we used to do because it feels like a hassle. It feels like a burden. But that's not true. It's just a cultural headwind. It's one of the instincts that we collectively carry together. We've lost the mutuality of serving other people who will in turn serve us. We've lost the art of interdependence. We've lost the art of mutual care and well-being. Now again, that's not what this lesson's about, this mini-week lesson. It's not about joining, though joining is a good thing for us to consider because we really have lost that art. But it's about how easy it is to fall into a system of overcorrection. How easy it is when the society shifts in solving one problem to fall into the creating of another problem. So, it's easy to fall into by solving a social pain or meeting a social need or taking advantage of a social opportunity. It's easy to fall into the correction that being human beings leads us to the overcorrection that causes us to lose something precious, lose something valuable. And what that does is it makes one of the essential skills for a healthy spiritual life, one of the essential skills for healthy spiritual well-being, the art of reclaiming. Reclaiming becomes an essential ingredient of being a healthy human being. Figuring out what we lost, figuring out why we lost it, and figuring out how we can reclaim it. And that's the lesson that we're starting right now. What we lost, what we did to lose it, and how we could get it back. I've got 6 topics on my list. I suspect by the time we finish, I'll have 10, because you will say stuff. And then I will have to extend the lesson to make it a little bit longer. But that's where we're going to start. What did we lose? What did we lose when we lost it? And how do we get it back? All right. So Indwelling Divine, may ours be a spiritual journey with all the tools we need, including the tool of reclaiming. Amen. Well, if you would, please prepare your offering. We all give online now. If you go to our website, go to the top, there's a donate button, and you'll see that there are lots and lots of ways to give. If you're here in Raleigh, or if you're joining us from far away, we do invite you to take an ownership stake in the community. I will tell you this, you haven't seen it yet, but I've seen it. I saw the report from last month. It was the first time in a long time we went way under budget. And I got to tell you, this is not the time for us to be going way under budget. We're about to have some expenses come up. We've got to build some stuff. Depending on where we go, we're either going to have to build a portable unit or we're going to have to build a stationary unit. We're going to have to build stuff, and it's going to cost us money. So this is not the time to be behind. So remember what I say all the time. There is good return when we invest in community, because what community does is takes those resources, our love, our energy, our time, and our money, and builds something with it and gives it back to us in an amplified way, a context, an environment in which we thrive. So go to our website and donate at the top of the button. Donate button is at the top of the website. Do that. And in a moment, we're going to dismiss the folks on the live stream, and we'll do What Are You Thinking here in the room. And those of you online, we invite you to do What Are You Thinking as well, but to do it on Zoom. There's a link on the front page of our website, and if you've hung in there this long, we're going to tell you the password. It is, get ready, 1417. The first 4 numbers of our street address, 1417. And online, What Are You Thinking is a great way to connect, think more deeply about the lesson, but also to get to know some people. So hope you'll join. If you would, let's dismiss the folks online. If you would, put your hand on your heart, and let's remember that we are, every one of us, carriers of the indwelling divine. Love and joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, all of those things that we call the fruit of God's Spirit are in us. And if you would extend your other hand to our city, let's look for opportunities to share what's in us. It's already there with the people that we live and work, the people we go to school with, looking for opportunities to repair, to heal our worlds. Amen. God bless you all. You are dismissed. We are not dismissed. All right, here's what we are going to do. We're going to go to those questions in a moment, but first,